Washington's presidency is basically 8 years of him just like being the dad, being like, everybody stop fighting, just chill out, can we just have like a few minutes of peace? Domestically, the big issue is the philosophical divide between Federalists and Anti-Federalists. There's not official political parties yet, that's gonna be after Washington, but basically like Hamilton is leading the charge of wanting to strengthen the Federalist government, including creating a national bank, and Anti-Federalists are like, whoa, that is not what we agreed to in this new constitution. They also have to figure out what the Supreme Court is actually going to look like. They couldn't really figure that out during the Constitutional Convention, and so Congress just decides it's going to be one Chief Justice and then 5 Associate Justices, so we originally had only 6 people on the Supreme Court. Washington also has to form the first cabinet, and he originally just has 4 cabinet level members. Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of War, Henry Knox, as in Fort Knox, and Attorney General Edmund Randolph. But the even bigger issues facing Washington were going to be with foreign governments. Follow for part 2. The more complicated issue facing George Washington was foreign policy, because Europe was just a mess. So France, inspired by our own revolution and helped along by Lafayette, starts their own revolution. And they're like, hey, great, perfect time for y'all to return the favor. And George is like, ugh. George feels like the new country is way too weak to get involved in like the crisis of like European affairs. And so he's like, sorry, France, we'll get around to you in like, I don't know, like June 6th, 1944. And England is still in North America, right? They still control Canada. They still have a lot of forts along the western kind of territories. And they're also just like stopping American ships and impressing their sailors, meaning taking them, saying like, hey, you're actually British people and you need to serve. And so George just like doesn't know what to do. He just keeps trying to maintain neutrality, and that's making all of the Americans mad. But Spain sort of swoops in and is like, this is an opportunity to gain an ally in the New World. And so they give us like right of deposit in New Orleans, and that's kind of nice of them. One other complicated question in the early republic is the status of indigenous people, and especially the status of independent indigenous nations that have their own political alliances and treaties, especially with the British. But now, are those treaties going to still be honored by the new US government? Spoiler alert, no. Some indigenous people flee to British or Spanish territory where they're treated like a little bit better than in the new US. Some indigenous people fight, especially in the Northwest Territory, this really valuable Ohio River Valley. This is where we see the first kind of formal military battles between the US and indigenous people, especially at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. Ironically, enslaved people, as they're attempting to escape plantations, a lot of times they flee into indigenous land because they know they will be treated much more fairly there. And this was a big enough issue that it's one of the first laws ever passed by Congress in 1790, the Indian Intercourse Act. This said that the federal government, not states, not individuals, were the only ones who could legally negotiate with indigenous people. Obviously, like white settlers, ignore this. So George Washington leaves the presidency after just 2 terms. He probably could have been president for like the rest of his life if he wanted to. There's actually nothing in the Constitution or in the laws until the 1950s that says a president can only serve 2 terms. Everyone was just following Washington's lead until FDR. When he gives his farewell address one last time, he gives the young nation a few pieces of advice. Number 1, avoid entangling permanent alliances, especially in European affairs. Number 2, don't incur national debt. Number 3, don't fall into sectionalism or fighting over regional differences. And finally, do not form political parties. Let me actually just read to you what he wrote about political parties, and you tell me if he was a time traveler or not. Quote, political parties serve always to distract the public councils and enfeeble the public administration. It agitates the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms, kindles the animosity of one part against another, foments occasionally riot and insurrection, and opens the door to foreign influence and corruption. So my AP US history colleague is like in love with John Adams, and I don't get it. But I do think there are 2 events during his presidency that are really important for understanding like the 1800s in American history. The first is the Alien and Sedition Acts. It started with the Naturalization Act, which made it a lot harder to become a US citizen. You had to live in the country instead of 5 years, 14 years. This was explicitly political. Federalists knew that most immigrants voted for the Democratic Republican Party, their opponent, and so they just made it harder for immigrants to become citizens and be able to vote. They also passed the Sedition Act, which made it illegal for newspapers to criticize the president or Congress, so like, First Amendment much? In response to the Alien and Sedition Acts, 2 states, Kentucky and Virginia, led by James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, wrote resolutions basically declaring that like they saw these laws as unconstitutional, and so states could nullify or basically declare federal laws void if they believed they violated the Constitution. This is foreshadowing for states' rights in the Civil War, and we'll come back to it in a few decades. US History Summer School. Okay, let's move away from discussions of race and slavery for now. You know we're going to talk about it plenty. And let's talk about Thomas Jefferson's presidency. So when he was elected in 1800, it was known as the Revolution of 1800 because it was the first time in U.S. history that one political party, John Adams' Federalist Party, lost the election and willingly and peacefully left the White House, and Jefferson of the Democratic Republican Party came in. So it was a peaceful transfer of power. And this, for a lot of historians, is kind of the moment when our new democracy gets truly solidified. Like, oh, this is a thing. This is gonna last for a while. So the early Republican period, which is really from like around 1800 till the 1820s, is so important for understanding the development of the United States American national identity. And Jefferson's vision of a nation of small farmers is really important for that, right? One of the continuities throughout American history is expansion. The United States feels this need, this urge, this desire, this entitlement to expand, to get more land, to keep searching, to keep conquering, to keep finding new places, whatever, right? And so if Jefferson's vision of this being this huge nation of small farmers, well, we need more land for all those small farmers. That's where the Louisiana Purchase comes in. So Napoleon is wanting to get rid of this huge chunk of land, which is not just today's Louisiana, it's like a third of the continental United States now. He's trying to fight the revolution in Haiti, among other things, conquer Europe, invade Russia, whatever. So he sells Jefferson this Louisiana Purchase for like an incredibly good real estate deal. Jefferson sends out Lewis and Clark to start exploring it with the help of Sacagawea and many indigenous people. And back in sort of the more settled United States, he does a lot to try to expand our kind of small democracy. And of course, there's a huge asterisk. There are a ton of people, the vast majority of people are left out of this. But relative to the time period, Jefferson's view that, for example, all white men should be allowed to vote, like he pushed for states to eliminate property owning requirements for voting, that's a huge deal. Like relative to all the other states around the world at this time, that is incredibly progressive. He also founded the first national military academy that would become West Point, although his main focus in establishing the school was to have an officer engineering corps that could help build infrastructure for the new country. If you study world history like I do, like you conquer a place, you gain new land, like in the Louisiana Purchase, whatever, and the first thing you do is start building roads and building infrastructure. So Jefferson's view of this nation of small farmers who are all sort of independent, kind of rugged individualists who are going to make their own way, the American dream, rags to riches. Like that one is fairly true. Like he follows through on that. If you are a white dude, the United States is a land of opportunity for you. And that is partly thanks to Jefferson's vision. But this is also going to influence like just the philosophy of what it means to be an American and what American institutions should look like kind of forever, but especially through the 1800s. And now an ode to Aaron Burr. Oh, Aaron Burr, as vice president and head of the Senate, you eliminated a rule that's now left us with the filibuster, so the Senate can effectively never get anything done. Jefferson dropped you as his VP from the 1804 ticket, so you decided to run for governor of New York. But your old foe Hamilton spoke out against you, and you dueled him, and we all know how that ended. After you murdered one of the founders of the nation, you went on the run. You were still VP, by the way. First to Appalachia and then further west towards Mexico, apparently you had dreams of becoming king of some Western empire. You recruited men, you stockpiled weapons, you built boats. After you captured in New Orleans and put on trial for treason, none of the founders would speak on your behalf. You were eventually acquitted, and you spent the last 30 years of your life just quietly living as a lawyer on Staten Island, watching politics pass you by. Oh yeah, and when your wife wanted to divorce you, she hired as her divorce lawyer Alexander Hamilton Jr.